Hey everyone, and welcome to All Things Grace podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Majors, and I am here with this just amazing guest. These are the things that I really love. So we met for the first time yesterday, and in the short span of time, I'm like, you have to come on this show. So I am delighted to have with me Wendy Lewis. Wendy is here in Seattle. She is first a little bit about her. She is the just the force in the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You are the visionary behind AllySHIFT, a groundbreaking platform designed to advance advocacy and sustainable equity. I just love that you name it as sustainable, because this is not your run-of-the-mill, check the box kind of conversation that she is engaging in and leading. She is the executive producer, and this is amazing, of an award-winning documentary, Beyond Their Years, The Incredible Legacy of Herb Carnegie and Buck O'Neill. This is an exploration of the groundbreaking contributions of these two legendary figures in sports, shedding light on their profound impact on baseball, civil rights, and the fight for racial equality. The screening is tonight, Thursday, September 19th at 5:30 at the Washington State Black Legacy Institute. I'll make sure to post it on my socials. I'll make sure to put it in the description below so you can find out the when and wheres. But I will definitely be there. Wendy's career includes transformative work as the former global chief diversity officer of McDonald, where her initiatives like the global gender balance and diversity strategy were adopted worldwide. Over 30 years experience, trailblazing roles with the Major League Baseball, and just continually in the conversation and leading conversation from transactional to transformative. So we are going to hop in and just start digging in and learning more about this journey that you've been on. So I think what I'll start with is just tell us a little bit about, I'm trying to figure out what draws people to DEI. And, DEI was not a catchword when you started. It was not a thing. So what was that like? What was like being a Black woman doing DEI with these big organizations, which already are fraught with, during that time especially, lots of unseen stuff that people went through, in particular women of color, Black women in particular. So talk to us about that journey, how you got into it, and the evolution of it.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Majors. You're absolutely right. We became, great friends in a span of less than 24 hours. But, someone told me many years ago, spirit, no spirit. And I thought I knew I would be attracted to you and your work just based on what I read and what I heard. But face to face, even if it is in the box of Zoom, there was a connection. So when you gave me this gracious invitation, I wanted to do it because I want to connect with you, because what you're doing is brilliant and so desperately needed, because the empathy gene that you encourage people to put more muscle to is so needed and misunderstood. But to answer your question, it really is interesting how the journey starts, because for a lot of us who, were doing this, I'll say definitely, 3 decades ago, some people more, some people less. We were originally drawn to it because we knew the truth and saw an opportunity to really position that in some very formal ways, in some very helpful ways. What organizations were attracted to was finding sort of that sweet spot of compliance and reduced liability, and risk adverse to exposure, right? So they came at it with, I think, very self-serving ways, but also the whole business case behind it. Other folks saw it as sort of marketing genius, right? Finding ways to engage with these consumers, with these customers who were evolving in terms of their economic strength, and just the general population, but also sort of linking to where cultures were creating trends, whether that was in what we saw or what we ate, and definitely what we chose to do. So the organization, I think, originally and to this day, were very attractive because it really created huge profitability centers
Mhm.
and also saved them a lot of time and aggravation.
Mhm.
Um, but it linked quite nicely with individuals like myself, who it was like finally, and we were given infrastructure and in some cases budgets and really brand positioning to get the work done that we really felt had not been done previously and the way that it should have been done with respect and authority. Uh,
Mhm.
and wanting to cultivate those relationships in those communities. My two sort of major brands that you mentioned, Major League Baseball and McDonald's. And yes, I wanted the people that I touched and that I wanted us to touch to really benefit from those brands. So it
Mhm.
wasn't about making somebody else rich, but I actually believe very strongly that those brands could have rich lives as well. So you just sort of jump in there and you find out the water is much deeper than you thought. Um, you find out sometimes the shoreline is gone, so all you can do is swim forward.
Mhm.
And it's one of those experiences where you build the plane while it is in the air.
Mhm. Mhm. That's so very true. Um, are you hearing feedback? It does. It did that on one of my last calls. Can you hear? Okay.
I'm hearing you perfectly. Yeah.
Okay, great. So you've been doing this for a while, and then all of a sudden, everyone's a DEI consultant. And people come in and they have very strong opinions. I think one of the things where we miss the mark is I think we just kind of walk into things saying, I got it from here, or I can do it. And, without understanding the legacy and the evolution of the work. So
Yeah.
you're not giving proper credit to the shoulders that you're standing on, but also the difference in the organizations now, because now, we talk about racial difference, we talk about gender difference and orientation, all kinds of things, but now we need to talk about generational difference
Sure.
and the speeds in which people think things should be happening, where you were around at a time where things moved a lot slower and there was more
Mhm.
patience with the process, or a different kind of perspective in relationship to process. Now
Right.
process looks different. What are some of the mistakes that many DEI folks like me well, we'll talk about my change in thought about things, but what are some of the mistakes that you see, or missteps, or things that maybe we could do a little different in order to create spaces where real conversation can be had?
I think a good analogy would be I love swimming, right? And I'm becoming a swimmer. I thought I was a better swimmer than I actually was until I got into deeper water and found out I didn't have that sense of security and
Mm,
that I felt, if I'm not careful, I'm going to drown. So I would say that a lot of sort of folks with lesser experience in this who wanted to tackle the big stuff because that's a headline, because maybe they think they can fix something very quickly. You do that. You like water. You might play in it. You might be an okay swimmer, but they want to jump into the deep without any conversation with those who had been navigating those waters. On more than one occasion, I've been on a panel where someone had just started in their role. And we're all going like, well, great, welcome. I would pull them to the side when I could and say, what are you doing here? And
mm,
they would say, well, and they would look at me. I said, how well do you know your organization?
mm,
Unless you're here because you've been promoted and moved through the organization, you got to be very, very careful
mhm,
about misrepresentation of yourself and really what you all can deliver. So I would say the mistake a lot of folks made who got into these roles, maybe very quickly, particularly if they were representing organizations. How much time did they spend just being quiet and understanding the culture? I remember when I went to Major League Baseball, amazing brand. It was like, oh my God, I'm working for the Chicago Cubs. So I couldn't believe I was there. I just wanted to sit down somewhere and go to batting practice and understand how this thing worked. There was a season to it, there was a cadence to it. The business model wasn't what I thought it was. I had a lot to learn, so I didn't really want to even talk about it. Right, I just want to sit there and be a student. So I would say, one, we got to get better at understanding what scholarship means, and what I would consider leading practices that have been shaped in the last decades. That's still kind of new. Whereas marketing, finance, IT, HR stuff's been there a long time. DEI as we know it today, to me, as far as I'm concerned, is still relatively new, as a business practice and a business opportunity. I think I might have mentioned this to you yesterday, but they're words that I live by. It's one of my favorite sayings in Bible passages is be quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to get angry. And that's James 1:9, if anybody is interested. So there I could see mistakes being made two ways. One, folks really did position themselves in ways that weren't authentic. In other ways, people were superstars and they got it right away, and they could like walk on water straight out of the door. That's not all of us, right? That is uncommon. The other thing is, too often I've seen where what I will say, some of the icons in this, the folks that really did get it started, if we're there with you, please don't act like we're not. Please don't talk like you were the first when I'm sitting right there next to you. So there's sort of that whole deference to what I consider, pioneers of the game, people that build this business practice as we know it today. Very often I see that being short-sighted by the practitioners themselves. It's one thing to have organizations pretend it didn't exist, but I hope that we build that respect and that regard for each other better. But it works both ways. I want you to know that I also tell my senior leaders, you better be quick to listen, because this next generation of practitioners has a lot they can teach us, and it's really together that we can really make this work. Right. To me, unprecedented, regardless of what the current circumstances are.
Yeah. So, AllySHIFT. So something was happening. You were doing your work, humming along, and all of a sudden there was something that happened that you needed to respond to, and you created AllySHIFT in response to.
Be quite honest with you, all that was going on in 2020, but particularly what happened January 6th. When I sat there, we were sort of witnesses of the absolute worst of what we could be, with what we know happened with George Floyd. With night after night, when it was being reported, we were dying. We were getting sick and dying from COVID. That we were living in a time that nobody could remember living in before. So you already were feeling kind of at the edge. But then to see January 6th, where thousands of people were willing to take us all out, were willing to declare their own civil rights war against humanity as we know it. I was so troubled by that. I was pissed, because when I looked at that crowd, I realized, I bet you anything I know some of these people. And I know for a fact, I know some people who know some of these people. And so I said out loud, actually to my daughter in the kitchen, I said, this is ridiculous. Where are the allies? Who's speaking up and speaking on behalf of this? Who's calling these people out? I said, you know what? I got to do something about this. I got to change the conversation about what it means to be allies. I said, because those numbnuts think they are allies, and you know what? They really are. So really got to do a shift in the thinking and blah, blah, blah. And my daughter looks at me and she says, well, that's what it is. I said, what is it? She says, Mom, it's AllySHIFT. You just said it. And that was that. Out of the mouths of babes, as they say.
So simple. So simple. Wow.
Yeah.
So how does this program look in practice?
So one of the new features of the practice, actually, you mentioned, are the films. So I have an opportunity to actually take, I think, just very current and contemporary work and insert it into what I consider the AllySHIFT leadership and inclusive model.
Mm.
So that the model is based on, personal coaching or a wider audience, where basically allyship is built across a number of characteristics, starting with being a denier, going all the way through being an activist, and just creating a lot of workshopping and opportunity and conversation around that. So imagine now what I'm able to do is take a film that I'm just so just blessed to really be a part of, something like Beyond Their Years, where it's a phenomenal study of not only history, but currently what allies can do, and then build that into the model itself. So it becomes a very highly engaging conversation, real practical work, but its end result is really in challenging ourselves to be bigger, bolder, and better allies. And to me, that's what creates the ally sustainability.
Mm. Mm. So I want to pivot for a minute. In your journey, in particular as a Black woman, where do you, so I'll just use myself. So I've had moments. So for example, one of the hardest times where I really thought, am I going to do this, was George Floyd, was January 6th. In particular, January 6th, because it just made me feel that here are a group of people who feel entitled and feel they're on the right side of the fight. With nooses being hung up, with chants, with feces being spread on, like they felt that they were on the right side of the fight. They represent a significant, maybe not to that extreme, but they represent the psychology of a lot of folks. Then I looked at all my trainings that I had, especially those that were mandatory. So a lot of them folks don't want to be there. And then I started having notions about some of these people were probably there sitting here at my training against their will. Mind you, now with, things are now, no screens are on. So I'm sitting here looking to a sea of black faces, some black tiles. And I'm trying to do, and I'm like, this is not worth it. So this is when I started thinking, how do I change my model to be more supportive of my emotion, my health and well-being, and what I'm here to create and cause? So this is a multi-part question. Like, how do you care for yourself, especially during times like this where you are literally feeling like you're being attacked by this whole idea, but you have to hold space to lead people through it. Do you just do your Black girl magic thing and compartmentalize, I'm here to work, let's go? Or do you find where do you go to do it authentically and care for yourself, but also be true to the mission at hand?
The first rule of AllySHIFT is ally to self.
Mm.
You cannot do this work with a sustainable determination without taking care of yourself. It literally goes back to whatever is the premise that you have to be as healthy as you can be to support the health of others. When the house is burning, you just get everybody out, throw them out the window if you have to. When it's 911, you got to do what you got to do when you got to do it. But you can't sustain that. When we talk about the AllySHIFT model, we talk about the folks who are upstanders and bystanders. And out of that usually come heroes, where someone literally has run into a building or wrestled with the person with the gun. And unless you are a dedicated firefighter or law enforcement is your trade, that's what you do, you and I can't sustain doing that.
Right.
So the reality is you have to take care of yourself. So you really understand authentically what is your call, what is your role. You cannot carry everybody and do everything. So it is really understanding, how do I balance my time, my ability, my spirituality, so that I can be stronger, bigger, better, so I can live longer.
Yeah.
Because we really got to start looking at the systems that you're talking about. They got to have longevity. because the reality is AllySHIFT is a belief system. As you mentioned, and that's why I look at it now as a faith-based model, because you're right, those folks believe in what they're doing.
That's right.
They believe in what they're doing. My belief system is based on Christian principles. Other folks are based on other principles. But AllySHIFT is created to be a faith-based model so that you believe you believe it. And I just think it not only makes the work more beneficial to both yourself and others, but it also carries you, because this is not easy. This will wear you out.
Yes. Speaking of being worn out, what I'm finding a lot is, I don't even know how to unpack this, but because we have been duped, I'll say, by people who have a vested interest in us infighting and fighting amongst each other down here.
Yeah.
They've created this notion or this thought that there's only one mic. So if we're talking about Black men in policing, we can't be talking about what's happening at the border. If we're talking about, a woman's reproductive rights, we can't also be talking about LGBTQIA plus abuse and disappearances and their whole world of things that they're trying to reconcile. And I want to say, in my estimation, it's fairly new, like this level of like, no, let's have a conversation. We're here. Let's have a conversation. You hear it along the way. We're here. We're queer. Get used to it. Like back in the 80s, right? But it's a different conversation, and it's a different kind of elevation of like, no, we want you to pay attention to what's happening in our community. And we have Black folks going, hello, hi, we've been here. We've had these issues. Nobody is, we don't go to Zoom call where people putting their, they'll put their pronouns, but they're not putting identifies Black or whatever it is, right? Like, so now here it is. So I'm seeing that a lot. Like, let's not just call it racial equity, just equity. Let's call it equity because we're here too. Or let's not call it BIPOC. Let's just call it people of color, because Black and Indigenous, you've had a different journey, but we're all oppressed. And I'm like, systemic oppression is a little different than prejudice. Like, let's figure out how to acknowledge the deep systemic psychological abusive warfare that happens when you want to take somebody's land and then make them disappear. Or now when you want to objectify a whole body against their will. So you have to do a whole psychological trip to get them to self-subjugate, self-oppress, right? You got to have the overseer stitching on everybody, right? That's a whole different process. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. But is there a way, how do we acknowledge that without saying, it's not we don't care about, it's different. So we all have a conversation about our different ways that it shows up for us without making it seem like them against us, or it has to be on a Black or white binary or Black and Indigenous, right? And so now I'm finding more and more bubbling up among Black folks when we get in our little affinity groups. Like, even they don't see us. Like, now that's, we can't. Any thoughts about how for people to understand and acknowledge the differences while not making it good or bad, but just different? What are your thoughts on that?
One of the most egregious things that are happening, very locally, very currently, is the eradication of history, right? And there's a reason for that. There is a reason for that kind of erasure. Because if we really understand more the history of this country and ourselves, first of all, we will find how we are very interdependent, right? You will find that when you talk about chattel slavery, the history of who that was, when that was, and why certain people got switched out because other people could do it better and live longer. I mean, it's just crazy town stuff, right? But the reality is, without saying much more other than the history of humanity is this. it ends up being the proof point of not only, no, this is systematic. This has been going on for hundreds of years. So what has happened is it is not just replay, it's transparency. So now we see it. And so that's why the attack on history, particularly Black history, particularly African history, because if you take that away, if children can't learn, if educators can't teach, if librarians can't host resources, and you just tell it like somebody wants to tell it, then it does kind of seem like you're calling folks out, and it's me against you, because you don't even know what the history is. I didn't just say my history. I'm talking about the whole story. And so I think that's the compelling part. We are talking to much wider audiences, and then we got to get very authentic and truthful about ourselves. So if we just, for instance, just talk about Black people and our Africanness, how a part of the success of slavery was us enslaving each other for others, which created a whole different treatment.
That's right.
You know, a part of the racism and bias is for the, long time standing of our colorism issues. You know, folk like my mom and other folks' mom, as pure and lovely as I love my sorors in the sorority group, we got to admit, we put folks through we put folks through, paper brown test. We did that.
That's right.
And that's why I think it is so interesting and indicative on us, for us really to become better learners. Because you start to realize there is this interdependency on each other, but it is also how we're going to get out of this alive.
That's right.
So we really do need to know more about ourselves and more about each other. And when it is time for you to talk more specifically about you, Black woman, people need to understand, no, this chapter has to happen. This is what I got to do, and this is why. And when we know that lane has to be narrow and long, we just have to claim it, because all of it is important. But it will not, you don't create sustainability with a fraction of what it is you need to know.
Yeah. And I really love that part too, because I think it is equally important to say, yeah, for every plantation, there was a slave, there was a overseer. You think people could just step onto the continent of Africa and start snatching people? That was organized.
Well organized.
Inside job with folks who were there facilitating the exchange of these bodies.
Yeah.
So even part of that is like, I want all of it. I want all the history. I want people all of it, so that, because in my conversation today that I was on with a client just now, they were like, well, what do we do about leadership that is holding up the fight, especially leaders of color, especially Black leaders who are holding up the fight, which are preventing us from serving our clients, which are homeless folks, disproportionately Black folks and folks of color and trans folks and all of that. They're part of the problem. Well, part of our problem is that we forget and we expect, again, all skin folk ain't kin folk. So we think, well, surely you can relate to what it means to be oppressed. Open the doors. Yes. And they're like, I done climbed out the mud. I'm here. Who's coming in? Let me look and see, right? It's not like kicking the doors open. So I think that the part that we miss is not just the part between identities where your oppression and mine and who gets the mic now and who's more important, who's left out. But it's like, if you lift all of it up, it really does eliminate many of the competition things. Because then you'll see, oh, we've all been part of, have been subjected to and have subjected others to some form of prejudice, bias, oppression. We've done it, right? And so, yeah, I really love that. From your perspective, if there is something that you find to be kind of your go-to for, well, let me ask another question because it's more pressing or more whatever. In those moments where you are faced with just lots of emotion, two different sides, and you see it spinning up and you want to like, oh, I better stop this bus right now as a facilitator. Do you have a go-to thing or a go-to saying or something that you can tell folks who are practitioners of this work and you're holding spaces and they are equally right from their vantage point, but they can't make that connection? Where do you go and what do you say and how do you resolve that?
There's two things that I have recorded to memory, and then I literally play them in my head or even visualize them to give me back to center. One is, long time ago, I saw this play, Sammy Davis Jr., and it was called Stop the World, I Want to Get Off. And he was living his life, tons of issues. And when it got too deep, he would say, stop. And the scene would go black and he would just step out and sort of organize his thoughts and work through it and then walk back in. So literally, and I saw this play, I must have seen this play, I don't know, 40 years ago. I don't know how long ago, but it just seems like a lifetime. Until this day, I was just, and if nothing else, it works. So folks need to find out what is that code, what is that thing that they literally can get their body to respond to. The other thing is that this is a memory and a vision that I'm always mindful of. And if I don't remind myself of it, somebody's going to remind me. Melissa Harris Perry's book, Sister Citizen, she refers to, in particularly Black women, that we so often are trying to stand straight in crooked rooms.
Oh my God.
See what I mean?
Oh my. Oh.
See, didn't I just take you there?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And when you realize that's what's happening, what actually happens physiologically is what you just did. You don't panic like, oh my God. Instead, you go, wait a minute, and you sigh.
Yeah.
You release because you're like, wait a minute, let me get myself together. Because I didn't even realize it was crooked.
That's right.
So if I don't take account of where I am and who I am, I'm gonna fall over. Because the room is crooked. It has always been crooked. And then you can get in the deep, which I tend to do sometimes. And there's all these tests that they used to do with equilibrium and torture and all that to assess whether it's astronauts or whatever, how do people manage their equilibrium? What are people willing to do physiologically, psychologically, spiritually to align themselves with the environment that they're in? And when they did this study about being in angled rooms that actually had been created where the furniture is nailed down and all that. So the room is crooked. It's literally crooked. How people would actually lean into the lean to make themselves straight.
Right.
And then there are people who, no matter what, quicker than others, lean against it and just sort of stand straight no matter what. And you got to figure out which one of those are you and which scene are you in, because sometimes we got to lean in and other times we got to stand straight. But most importantly, we have to recognize the room is crooked. Okay.
I wanted to say thank you. Okay, everyone. Enjoy the show. Yeah. Because I mean, it is. I would be. Oh, I can't even imagine how many people this resonates for, because we are conditioned to adjust to the environment.
Yes.
We're not conditioned to walk in and say, it's a new room now. I'm here. Thank you. And, there's some of us walk through life with that, like, let the sun rise now, I'm here. But they usually don't look like us that kind of have walk in spaces with that command. We have to learn that. And we have to learn it in a way where we're big enough to walk in the room, but if it's too big, now you're a threat, right? And so even managing the levers of this space requires me to be this big, this space, and a lot of folks just don't have that.
Sure.
Wendy Lewis.
Yes, ma'am.
When are you done? When are you done with all of this? And like, speaking of sustainability, when do you feel like, okay, I've done all I'm going to do with this. I'm done.
For me, the word is never.
Okay.
The word is never. And it is because I had this amazing thing happen as a child. We lived in a neighborhood that was a cul-de-sac. And I just want you to know, in a neighborhood, in the hood, so I didn't even know what a cul-de-sac was till I didn't even know that was a word. Yeah, all I knew is I lived on a dead-end street.
Uh-huh.
But it almost felt like a gated community because the families who were there were so protective of their families and each other. Now, those families were every spectrum of people that I've ever lived with. There was a representation on that block of gender in all the ways that we think of it today. There was a representation of race and ethnicity, and it showed up in food, and it showed up in clothes, and it showed up in holidays, and we were in each other's house. And one of the most provocative things, it was like God put me in that story, because you can't make this up. If you can imagine, kind of in the center of the cul-de-sac, there was an elderly white lady who became like grandma on the block. This woman she made cookies and stuff every day, and she just lived to just have everybody eat all of her homemade treats and all that. Her name was Mrs. False.
False?
Literally, Mrs. False. And she was like the grandma of the block, and there were black kids, and there were Latino families, and there were gay families, and there were biracial families, and there were old people, and there were young people, and we played in the street. And that's how I got to love sports so much, because all the kids played in the street, and your mom and daddy's, antenna on their car might have been second base. And so we got in trouble sometimes. But we were all in each other's houses. We would sit on each other's porches. When that light came on, you either better be in your house or sitting on somebody's porch. And I got to grow up in a community like that. And so when you sort of start to, matriculate into the world, you go off the block and you realize it is much more segregated than that. And you are to be treated much more segregated than that. You never forgot all those feelings. So my wonder years, my comfort foods come from this whole diversity of people. And so that's that when people say, how can you keep doing this? I tell folks, I was born this way.
That's where you come from. Yeah. We talk about people having these conversations. I use the term like, what is your come from? Because we can have the same conversation, but if your come from is 1960 rural Mississippi, white man, and my come from is Seattle, Washington, black woman.
Yeah.
Of course we think differently.
Yeah.
So first, let's agree that it's not just this issue and you are kind of pulling something out of the air about how you think about it, right? Now that's on this level, but it gets bigger there. And this is what I'll ask you. And okay, my time. Now I'm starting to narrow down on my 80. Who do you say, who is the person that you say, we are so misaligned, it would be harmful to me to deal with you? Or do you say, no, I will tell anybody anything and I'm just not attached to what they think? Or is there some people you're like, I don't even engage and give my energy there? Where do you fall when it comes from somebody who's like in a completely different perspective than you?
And it comes from also my belief system. Okay. I am not here to save everybody. I can pray for everybody. I ain't here to save everybody. So there are toxic people that I need to stay away from. because I need to save that energy and that love and support for where it is needed. And so I do not believe in overly engaging with folks who literally their objective is to take you out. Sometimes you got to stay there and fight the fight. And I'm saying, you just, got to be a coward and run, but you have to be wise about when you need to be present, when you need to lean in, and when you need to opt out. And I'm a big believer in understanding what those signs are. You got to be intuitive, read the room, trust yourself. And if you really believe in something, let that belief system take care of all the rest of that.
That's right. That's great. That's all about that, having a place to stand and ground yourself in, and once you're grounded in that way, you really kind of do become immovable to outside stimulus that, wants to, either you're the one with the problem or there's not, Okay, got it. Last question, or last thing to talk about, and that is the screening tonight. I'm so excited. Can you talk a little bit about, as we close out, the screening this tonight, why you created it, where it came from, and what your plans are for this screening and how you want it to impact people?
It's Beyond Their Years, the incredible legacies of Herb Carnegie and Buck O'Neill. Herb Carnegie of hockey fame, and Buck O'Neill of Negro League Baseball and Major League Baseball fame. And it is a bittersweet life love story of how these incredibly talented and rich personality people had dual parallel existences without ever knowing each other. So it is the story of two sports. It's the story of, it's a North American story. It's Canada and the US, and how their lives were so similar and nobody realized it at the time. How they lived, how they died, and how they were eventually honored. And so it is, to me, so symbolic of how systemic oppressive environments work, and how the opportunity for allies to really create opportunity for folks to get what they deserve, for their lives to be well lived past the time that they were here, is really dependent upon us. And so my good buddy, who's actually the producer of the film, had previously done a documentary on a hockey great, Willie O'Gree, who's kind of considered the Jackie Robinson of hockey. Was telling me that he was doing another story on Herb Carnegie, who should have been the Jackie Robinson of hockey, but he was always denied. And he starts talking to me about Herb, and I said, that sounds exactly like Buck. He said, what are you talking about? And we just started changing stories, and we were finding out the dates are even matching up. I said, this is crazy.
Wow.
And I wished him well, because he was almost done with this film. He calls me back 48 hours later and says, Wendy, I'm redoing this film and I need your help. I said, what are you doing? And he says, we got to align this with Buck.
Wow. Come on.
I said, really? He said, really? And I said, but I thought you were ready to go into production. He says, yeah, we got to do this like in a couple of weeks. I was like, you're crazy.
Nice.
And that's how I became an executive producer.
Wow.
And the story unfolds, and you'll see it's rich. It is rich in just history, but also just greatness. And it's very inspiring. And I will not understate how much joy is in it as well.
I am so glad to hear you say that you centered some Black joy in it, because we get enough of the, oh my God, here we, and we walk out feeling, oh God, yeah, we're still, and you start making connections to, well, we're still here in some ways. But when you bring that joy into it, it's just a reminder that we are some folks that find a way.
Yeah.
We are some folks that find a way to make meals out of nothing, to bring joy out of nothing, to bring love. dance, creativity, all these things for nothing, right? So
Yeah.
I'm super excited to see it and looking forward to being there. It's 5:30 tonight. Gosh, I always get the name because it's new. It's new, so I always forget the name. It is what is it called? Come on. I forgot.
Washington State
Washington State Black Legacy Institute.
Yes.
Washington State Black Legacy Institute. It's in West Seattle. I don't have the address right now, but tonight, so the doors open at 5:30. Just be some networking, and then the screening starts at 6, and then there'll be some panel conversations and discussions as well. So I will definitely be there. I am so looking forward to Wendy Lewis. You are a dynamic powerhouse. You're more than a notion. But also I recognize and I want to acknowledge that I know that I stand on your, I get it. I know that. And so I want folks who are newer to the game to really understand, connect with, follow folks who've been doing this for a long time so that we can contextualize our work inside of the longer history of this work and those who've been doing it on the front line. So thank you so much. It is about 2 something. I will see you in about 3 hours-ish. Looking forward to it. So we'll see you.
Thank you. And God bless you. And you continue the great stuff you're doing. I'm so proud of you. I am so proud of you and so happy to have met you.
Thank you so much. We'll talk soon.
All right. Take care, my dear.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed what you heard today. If you did, please click the small bell and become a subscriber and join me in spreading the message of grace.